Welcome everyone. My name is Chaim Michael, and I will deliver the meetup about Scala. Kind of a jump start, especially for those who are doing their first steps. So we'll talk about Scala. What is it? Scala. We will focus on how short the code becomes when moving to Scala. We'll talk about the background, the history of Scala, and then talk about what can we see today in the industry when dealing with Scala companies that use Scala, what companies usually use Scala for. And then we're going to try to compare Scala with other programming languages. After that, I will talk about my recommended ID, not just mine, but after all, everyone. And when it comes to Scala, we will talk about documentation, additional learning resources, and then conclude with Q&A. So let's start. So Scala is, is not just a functional programming language. It is also an object-oriented programming language so that you can use Scala in a similar way to other well-known programming languages, object-oriented programming languages such as Java, C Sharp, and similar. In addition, its support for functional programming um, is well developed, and it starts with the fact that every function in Scala is actually an object, something that you won't find in Java and C Sharp. Scala was developed based on Java. When you code in Scala, the code is compiled into Java bytecode. Similarly to code you write in Java. When you code in Java, the code is compiled into Java bytecode, and then the Java bytecode is executed on top of the Java virtual machine. The same happens today nearly with any programming language you think about. There is usually a virtual machine in C Sharp, PHP, JavaScript, Python. There is a virtual machine. You code in one programming language, then that code is compiled into kind of a virtual machine code. It looks very similar to assembler, and that code is executed on top of the virtual machine. Now, Scala was developed based on Java. When you code in Scala, the code is compiled into Java bytecode, just as it happens when you code in Java. The Java bytecode we get is executed on top of the Java virtual machine. So we can easily use within our code in Scala classes and libraries that were developed in any other programming language that was compiled into Java bytecode. So when coding in Scala, we can easily use classes that were developed in Java and vice versa. When coding in Java, we can easily use classes that were developed in Scala. So you can take any framework in Java and use it coding in Scala. It can be Spring Boot, Hibernate, anything. Now, when you compare Scala to Java, Scala is kind of an improvement to Java. Its toolbox includes many possibilities you won't find in Java. In a way, you can think about Scala as an attempt to catch up with C Sharp. The work on Scala started when C Sharp emerged. In the beginning, C Sharp and Java were very similar. At some point, C Sharp started to move forward very fast, and the gap between Java and C Sharp was created. So Scala, in a way, tries and succeeds to fill in that gap. In addition, Scala provides us with capabilities that you won't find in C Sharp, of course, because Scala, it is first a functional programming language. Only the second, the support for object-oriented programming comes next. So if you want to compare to something in .NET, then the best would be comparing Scala with C Sharp. Now, something you will notice when coding in Scala, the code becomes smaller, shorter, significantly. For instance, look at this code sample, code in Java that defines a class. Its name is rectangle. In Scala, it will be one line. In Scala, the the title of the class, in this case, the rectangle, can be combined with the definition of the main constructor, the primary constructor. So when you instantiate the class in Scala, and the class was defined as you can see on the bottom, then the constructor includes two parameters, width and height. But given that width and height come together with a var before, var precedes the word width and the word height, it means that width and height are not only parameters, they are also instance variables that will exist in every rectangle object. So bottom line, the equivalent code for defining the class rectangle in Java is what you see on top. This is the equivalent code to what you have on the bottom. So code becomes shorter. Now let's talk a bit history. Who started the development of Scala? So Professor Martin Modersky from EPFL in Switzerland, he started to work on Scala. He started in 2001, and it was more or less at the same time when he also worked for Sun Microsystems on adding the support for generics to Java. The support for generics in Java isn't as in C#. It isn't a native support coming from the virtual machine. Martin Modelsky simply changed the compilation process and change it so that if you use generics in Java, additional code is added during the compilation, and that additional code supports generics, provides us with the possibility to use generics. So he is well familiar with the way the compilers in Java work. I mean, he is one of those that developed the first compilers in Java. So he decided to invent a new programming language. It will look different from Java, and when you code in that new programming language, the code will be compiled into Java bytecode. He took the compiler in Java and started to introduce changes, and this is how he came with a new compiler that takes code in Scala and compile it into Java bytecode. At 2011, the company name TypeSafe was founded in order to support the Scala ecosystem. In 2016, they changed their name into Lightbend. So if you want to have a feeling about the direction of Scala, check out the website, look at the web framework or framework in general they support, they promote, and that might give you some sense regarding the direction Scala takes. Now, let's talk about what happens in the industry with Scala. So as I've already told you, I'm with Scala since its early days. You will find Scala highly popular mainly on the server side. Even though you can use Scala in order to develop client application or even application for the Android platform, usually it doesn't happen. Scala is well familiar to companies on the server side. The main use of Scala is on the server side, and if to be more accurate, usually it is when dealing with big data, and I will talk about it later. If you search Google, check with ChatGPT, look for list of companies that using Scala. There are lots of companies. It's this programming language is here to stay. It's not going to disappear, at least not for the coming years. This is the feeling. And you can also find well-known companies as Twitter, Wix, LinkedIn, Coursera, and many others. Given that most of you are from Israel, there are more than a few companies, Israeli companies that use Scala. You can easily find their names, and those companies, I don't want to say desperate, but they have a need in Scala developers. It's not simple to find Scala developers, so it isn't as in other domains like full stack development. The full stack development domain is flooded. I mean, there are so many excellent full stack developers that were that lost their jobs during the last year you can find full stack developers, but looking for Scala developers is a bit more is a challenge. It is a challenge, and that's why if you check the salaries, you will find that Scala developers worldwide usually make more money compared with nearly any other developer in other domains. The average of the salary for Scala developers, I think it is the highest or one of the highest, and there is a reason for that because if you want to know Scala and you want to be useful, you first need to learn Java. So going through the learning curve of Java and then move forward with Scala, this is a long journey. For most developers, it is too much. Most developers stuck in Java. They don't move forward. So there is, bottom line, a shortage in Scala developers, and you can take an advantage of that. And again, it is relatively to other programming languages. A shortage in good developers always exists in every programming language, but in Scala, the shortage is even more severe because of the long and difficult learning curve. Now, I run a group on Facebook that focuses on Scala. I will give you the link later. And I asked a question. I wanted to find, it is a huge group, more than 2,000 members. I tried to get an answer whether Scala is for big data, meaning working with the Spark framework, that is a framework coming from Apache for big data, or do we have Scala developers doing other stuff, things other than big data? So I asked, what is the most popular framework you are using? So which framework do you use? That was the question. And if you use more than one framework, please select the one you use most. And as you can see from the result, yes, indeed, most 27% is a big share, but you can also see that there are many other Scala developers that are not into big data. So yes, Spark is popular, but there are other things Scala developers do a part of using the Spark framework. Another question that is interesting these days is how many developers have completed the shift from Scala 2 to Scala 3. The new version of Scala includes changes. It isn't it isn't the same. It's not the same as we had with Python. When moving in Python from Python 2 to Python 3, the changes were so big that it was nearly impossible to use libraries that were developed for Python 2 when coding in Python 3. So in Scala, there is a difference. There are changes. And it seems that most developers are still with Scala 2. But the change from Scala 2 to Scala 3 is not dramatic. And I tell you that from my experience. You can still, in most cases, code in Scala 3 and use libraries that were developed in Scala 2. In most cases, not all cases. So when checking on my end, looking for frameworks that already did the move from Scala 2 to Scala 3, most of the frameworks still haven't completed this change. Maybe that's why, in order to be on the safe side, in most companies, they still prefer to stay with the Scala 2 and simply wait for those frameworks to do the change, to do the transition, complete the transition from a framework that was developed for Scala 2 to a framework that was developed for Scala 3. So bottom line, the change from Scala 2 to Scala 3 is not dramatic as it happened with Python. It's not the same story. Still, there is a change. And as you can see, many developers have already moved to Scala 3, but we still have many others stuck with Scala 2. I expect that during the coming year or two, that will change and everyone will be well into Scala 3. Now, another question, and the answer for that is coming from a server delivered by JetBrains. That indicates that most Scala developers develop for the JVM. This is their target. The use of Scala.js, it exists, but to say hardly exists. Scala.js is a smaller version of Scala that allow you to code in Scala and compile the code into JavaScript. Um, I don't use Scala.js. I don't see a reason for using Scala.js. We have TypeScript. TypeScript is an excellent programming language for coding and then compile the code into JavaScript. I can see how Scala.js will catch up with TypeScript, so I don't see a reason for even talking about Scala.js, but still it exists. And Scala Native is about coding in Scala and developing and compiling it into native. Also something that already exists, and coding for Android, also something that I see as a gimmick, not as something serious to consider even. So moving forward, now let's talk about my try to compare Scala with other programming languages. So first, I just want to tell you a bit more about my background in programming. I started coding when I was a kid. Then at some point, I started university, but I didn't learn computer science. I thought about taking another direction, but the hobby of programming was with me, and eventually I found myself coming back to programming. So I'm making my living from programming for 30 years almost. I deliver academic courses in universities. I deliver training for software developers in companies. I deliver courses. I have courses on Udemy. If you check lifemichael.com website, you will find information about courses I developed on Udemy and courses and seminars I deliver mainly in companies. Now, I'm familiar with JavaScript since it emerged for nearly 30 years. JavaScript was invented by Netscape in the in 1996, something like that. So I know JavaScript since then. I'm with PHP since 2005. I'm a certified PHP engineer. I'm with Java since 1995. I have certifications from Sun and Oracle, various certifications. I'm with C# for more than 15 years. I delivered many C# and .NET courses in the Technion in Israel. And I'm also with Scala since 2009. I deliver academic courses about functional programming using Scala since 2009. I'm with Kotlin for 10 years already. I deliver courses in Kotlin mainly to companies. I also have the public course you can find about Kotlin on, just check the lifemichael.com website. You will find information about the public course. The same with Swift. So I'm well familiar with the programming languages and their ecosystem, and I keep tracking, see what happens with every programming language over time because I find it interesting. Now, Kotlin, Swift, and Scala are very similar, especially Kotlin and Scala, because both Kotlin and Scala were developed based on Java. The main use of Kotlin and Scala is coding, writing your code in Kotlin or Scala, and then compile it into Java bytecode, just as if you did the same as if you were coding in Java. So you can code in Kotlin, compile the code into Java bytecode, and combine it with other Java bytecode coming from code that was developed in Java or any other programming language that you can use and compile the code into Java bytecode. And the same with Scala. So when it comes to popularity, no argue, JavaScript is the most popular. I can see that I forgot to mention Python. I'm with Python for 15 years, almost 16 years, I think. I delivered lots of Python courses, mainly to companies. Python is very popular, very simple to learn, and its popularity with JavaScript are very high. PHP popularity during the last years has declined a bit, but still it is a very popular programming language. It is enough that you check the website of w3text.com, you will find that PHP is with 76.1% of all websites. 76.1% of all websites use PHP on their server side. So PHP is not going to disappear. It is a very popular programming language. Java and C# are less popular. Kotlin and Swift are even less, and Scala, its popularity is the smallest among those programming languages you can see on screen. If you check the TIOBE website, you can find an index for popularity of programming languages. And as you can see, we have the first 20 programming languages. Uh, Kotlin is one of them. Swift is one of them. On top, we can find C Sharp, C, Python. Scala is not. Scala is somewhere on the bottom, rank 36. This means something. There are lots of companies using Java. At some point, Kotlin was announced. It was 10 years ago. First, it was as a programming language for Android, but then companies found Kotlin highly useful on the server side. I can share with you most of the students in my Kotlin courses are from the server side, are not Android developers. I can share with you lots of companies started using Kotlin as an alternative to Java, and they preferred Kotlin over Scala, mainly, in my opinion, because Kotlin is simpler compared with Scala. The toolbox coming from with Scala is bigger. There is more stuff to learn. Scala is more sophisticated, more possibilities. Kotlin is simpler, and yet Kotlin closed the gap between Java and C# and beyond. When I say beyond, I mean that it supports um, stuff such as patterns matching that was added to C# only 2, 3 years ago, and now is added to Java, and more things beyond. Scala, of course, supports everything I can find in Kotlin and beyond. Do we need that beyond? I'm not sure. Bottom line, lots of companies chose moving forward with Kotlin, not with Scala. Still, you can find companies that do stuff in Scala and use Scala. And one more thing, I can share with you, I have a friend we met 10 years ago. He worked on a startup. There is always a startup he's working on. And then he told me about a new startup he's working on. And he told me, yeah, I'm going to do this and that. And I asked him, okay, which programming language do you choose? He said, Haskell. Haskell. Um, I said, Haskell, where will you find programmers knowing Haskell? He said, yeah, it will be difficult, but if I find one, I will find someone that knows programming. So bottom line, companies are looking for talents, the sharpest, the best developers. And when you have a talent, it's not a problem for that talent using Scala or Kotlin or another programming language. I see questions. We will get back to them, but first, let me continue with the slides because we are limited in time. So we talked about popularity. Let's talk about learning curve. No doubt, JavaScript, PHP, and Python are much simpler to learn. Then we have Java and C#. Then Swift and Kotlin that are very similar. And in the end, Scala is the most difficult one to learn. What does it mean? It means that more developers that will start learning Scala will fail comparing to developers that start learning Java, for instance, or JavaScript that are much simpler compared with Scala. I see that in classes I deliver, in courses I deliver. Scala is not simple. Java is not simple. There are many cases in which the students that learn for their BA in computer science, they have difficulties with Java, but when it comes to JavaScript and Python, it goes very simple. It's a very simple learning curve compared to Java, C#, not to mention Swift and Kotlin, and absolutely not to mention Scala, which is very difficult to learn. Now let's talk about the support for object-oriented and functional programming. So let's start with object-oriented. JavaScript support for object-oriented is a bit strange. If you are familiar with JavaScript, then you know that an object that is created using a class, it's not exactly a class. It's actually, there is the prototype-based inheritance. You have limitations. You have inheritance, but you can define interfaces. Python support for OOP is also very lousy, very poor, similarly to JavaScript. Then we have C Sharp, Java, Kotlin, and Swift. That their support for object-oriented is relatively strong. The same with Scala and PHP. Yes, PHP allows you to define classes, interfaces, and even traits. Um, Maybe I should take PHP a bit to the left and stay with the Scala, Swift, and Kotlin as the most OOP programming languages because they do not allow you to define static methods and static variables. There is no such thing as static variable or a static method. So Scala, Kotlin, and Swift are the most OOP we can say. Now about the functional programming support, then in JavaScript and Python and Scala and PHP, a function is an object. So it makes things simpler. In Swift and Kotlin, this isn't the case, even though the documentation claims that a function in Kotlin is a first-class citizen. When you learn that topic in depth, you find things are different. You will find that a function in Kotlin is not actually an object, and there is a similar trick to what we find in Java and C Sharp. I have an excellent course about that. Its name is Lambda Expressions in Kotlin on Udemy. I explain everything in that course. So when it comes to functional programming, C Sharp, JavaScript, Python, Scala, PHP are on top. Of course, Scala is on top of everyone, but more or less I put them together. And when it comes to C Sharp, JavaScript, and Kotlin, their support for functional programming is not as strong as the one we find in JavaScript, Python, PHP, and Scala, mainly for the fact that a function is an object in Scala, PHP, JavaScript, and Python. In the other programming languages, function is not an object. Now let's move forward. Platform dependency. Well, the dependency is very low in all programming languages these days because we have a virtual machine. Yet, if you take into consideration mobile devices, then JavaScript you can easily execute on every device, every mobile device. Executing Kotlin and Swift is a bit more difficult. The same with Scala, C Sharp, and Java, PHP, and Python. It is possible, but it's not as simple as JavaScript. Actually, JavaScript today is the Java that we thought 30 years ago will become. Java, there are the slogan, write once, run everywhere. It was an excellent slogan 30 years ago. Today, it's not true, but JavaScript, it is. You can write code in JavaScript and easily execute it on every platform. Now, regarding the development process, no argue, JavaScript, Python have the simplest development process. PHP, I put it on the right because when it comes to connecting the IDE with the debugger, many developers find it not trivial, get into difficulties, especially when they have a need to debug code running on the server side. I have excellent video clips on YouTube that explain how to do it, but most developers are not familiar with that. They have difficulties. So Python and JavaScript are the simplest development process. You just write code and that's it. Using Scala, Java, Kotlin, it becomes more sophisticated. But we have a build system. We have in Scala the SBT, Scala build tool. In Kotlin, we use the Gradle. In Java, also usually we use Gradle. So there are solutions. And in C Sharp, of course, there are solutions for keeping the development process relatively simple. Swift, I put on the right because you must have Mac OS. Well, you can. Swift is open source and is available for Windows as well. But then when you check the possibilities, you can find just one or two IDEs, and those IDEs are not as good as the Xcode that is coming from Apple for Mac OS. Not to mention alternatives for Xcode, such as the one we had from JetBrains, but they chose to cancel it for reasons we don't have time to get into. Let's move forward. Open source community is important. If you have problems, well, now these days you can use ChatGPT, so maybe the support coming from the community is less important, but still, the bigger community the community is, the simpler would be to overcome difficulties you have on the way. So Java and C are very popular, amazing community. The same with JavaScript, Python, and PHP. Excellent, amazing, big community. Now, when it comes to Swift, Kotlin, and Scala, well, they have their community is smaller. Well, there are less community. Scala, out of the three, of course, has the smallest open source community support, but still, I don't think it's a catastrophic. We have ChatGPT on the side. The support still exists, the community still exists, and so you can still find solutions. So it's not dramatic, the difference when it comes to open source community. Now, regarding hosting services, well, bottom line, you can host on the server side. Every application you code, it can be Java, C Sharp, Swift, Kotlin, Scala, Python, PHP, JavaScript, whatever. However, if you're not going with the three major cloud providers, Google, Amazon, and Azure, then and you go with a smaller company as the hosting service, then most of those smaller companies support, of course, having PHP on the server side. Some of them support Python. Some of them also support JavaScript, but the support for Java, C Sharp, Swift, Kotlin, and Scala is limited to the big ones, the big cloud providers. So if you have in mind an idea and you are not familiar with those big ones, such as Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, and so on, you have a problem. So good to know about that as well. Now let's talk about the ID. IntelliJ. Don't waste your time about the other IDs. Technically, you can find plugin and add the support for Scala when using Eclipse, and there is even there you can even find scalaid.org. Don't use it. Most developers use IntelliJ. If you insist on VS Code, you can find a plugin, but I recommend don't. Just as Biden says, don't use IntelliJ. The IntelliJ is the best. I trust me. I tried those IDs. I'm familiar with them. And IntelliJ, they have a community-free version. It is sufficient for most cases. Okay, if you are on a budget. If not, there is the ultimate version, and you can, if you are a student, you can get a free license for all the IDs coming from JetBrains for learning purposes. It's not a problem. Just Google two words, JetBrains and student. On Google, you will find the page with the instructions how to get a free license. If you check statistics, then according to the server coming from JetBrains, well, this is a bit problematic, counting on a server coming from JetBrains, saying that IntelliJ coming from JetBrains is the most popular IDE, but still, this is also my feeling. So far, I haven't met not even a single developer doing Scala or Kotlin or even Java using VS Code or any of the other tools. Everyone is using IntelliJ. And there is a reason. It is an excellent IDE. So use it. If you are doing your first step, start with IntelliJ. Now let's talk about documentation and other resources. There's the website scalalang.org where you can find excellent documentation. I can share that in the past, the documentation wasn't as good as it is today. Today, the documentation is polished, is better than what we had in the past. So learning using the documentation is excellent. You can use my video clips on YouTube. They are for free. These are two playlists, one of video clips in Hebrew, the other in English. Lots of video clips that will take you step by step through the first steps. There is a Scala developers group I created many years ago. It is the biggest on Facebook. This is the, I don't have the link for some reason. Well, search on Facebook, Scala developers, you will find it, 3,400 members. Coursera, you can find there an excellent course by Martin Odersky about functional programming principles in Scala. That course doesn't focus on Scala. You should come already familiar with Scala. Then you can benefit from the course. Excellent course about functional programming. This book is an excellent book about Scala coming from Martin Odersky. He wrote that book together with three others. It was recently updated for Scala 3. So I think it is a great resource, step-by-step guide to learn Scala. And remember, don't be afraid. There is a lot to learn. Scala is not, its learning curve is not simple. Kotlin learning curve is much simpler. And of course, you first need to know Java. If you don't know Java properly, I think it is a waste of time. First, catch up with Java, then move forward with Scala. Now I'm with your questions and answers, and so few in the chat. So what about Go? Well, I'm not familiar enough with Go in order to share my thoughts, so that's why I haven't added a word about Go. Go, a programming language coming from Google. However, my impression is that it is a relatively simple programming language. It's not the sophisticated Scala. It's not sophisticated as Scala, and I think it's worth learning Go, of course. I'm with Go, but not enough in order to share my thoughts. Do you think Kotlin will gain traction since the recent Kotlin multi-platform introduced? I don't think the Kotlin multi-platform is relevant for the growing popularity of Kotlin in the Java ecosystem. Okay, so there is a possibility to write Kotlin once and then get it compiled both for Android and iOS. This is the purpose. Look, the mobile applications. This is a topic for another meetup. I'm well familiar with Android and the difficulties with developing for Android and the difficulties for developing both for Android and iOS, and those difficulties eventually led to the emergence of alternative to native development in Java or Objective-C. Later it becomes Kotlin or Swift, because Swift took the place of Objective-C and Kotlin took the place of Java. I'm well familiar with the difficulties that led to the emergence of solutions such as Flutter with Dart, native script, and other solutions. So this is a huge topic for another meetup. And regarding Kotlin on the Java virtual machine in the Java ecosystem, in my opinion, the popularity will continue to grow, and the gap between Kotlin and Scala will even become bigger for the simple reason that Kotlin is simpler to learn compared with Scala. Even though the recent changes in Scala 3 that in a way turned it in a bit simpler programming language, still there is so much to learn when learning Scala compared with Kotlin, so that if you want to be a master in Scala, the effort is much bigger compared with Kotlin. Kotlin, for that reason, in my opinion, will continue to rise and gain more popularity. Ask .NET Core or container, you can all yeah, there are solutions for hosting .NET Core, but it's not as simple as with PHP and JavaScript. This is the truth, but I don't think that is dramatic, because if you're going for a serious adventure, you are probably already familiar with the big at least one of the big cloud providers. So you will have the possibility to run whatever you want. What are the benefits of IntelliJ currently using VS Code for my course? You can't compare two different worlds. IntelliJ is a polished IDE that makes things simpler in each and every step in the way. The wizards, the plugins that are already coming with the IntelliJ. You don't need to install additional plugins. There are plugins coming from JetBrains that do the work, such as AI autocomplete and so on. Eventually, the bottom line, the process, the journey, learning how to code in a programming in Java or Kotlin or Scala when using IntelliJ is simpler compared with VS Code. For those who already have experience and already have been in that journey, meaning that already know Scala, already know Kotlin, already know Java, if they want something else using VS Code and there are technical difficulties, they overcome those difficulties. It's not a catastrophe. It's not it won't block them. They can manage with VS Code. But those students doing their first step, I don't recommend VS Code. Go with JetBrains, IntelliJ, and the same with other programming languages. Give it a try. You'll see by yourself. Do you think that could be a downside for those learning as IntelliJ in doing steps? A downside for those learning. Okay. I understand. You say you ask TJ as wizards, magic, and so on. Yeah, there is something in what you say in a way. In TJ reminds me a bit the Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code, the Visual Studio from Microsoft that was tailored for C Sharp, F Sharp, VB, .NET development. Maybe, but maybe there is a bit of a downside, but I don't think it's worth the hassle involved with VS Code. I think that downside is very small. Okay, then. So we conclude. We'll end the meeting. I will send you the slide. I will also send you more resources so you can use them. Many of them are for free. And I wish you all the best, peace, and the best.
Sure. Bye.
Bye bye.